I recently moved into a new house in a quiet suburban area. I'm not going to say where, because it's had its fair share of media coverage and teens showing up at night trying to get a glimpse inside an famous house. It had been on the market for 3 years, and I secured the house at a much cheaper price due to the fact 2 people had been found murdered there. The mystery and brutality of the murders catapulted the story into the local news. No specific details were released to the public, and I only found out about it because a friend of mine is a local realtor with connections. Nobody was ever arrested for the murders. A male in his 30s was found living in the area, and a female in her 30s was found barricaded in a basement. Another mysterious fact was that the woman had barricaded herself from the inside in a desperate attempt to stop someone or something from getting in. Yesterday, whilst doing some cleaning in the basement, I came across a cell phone that had fallen down a gap behind the washing machine at the wall, and there's a voice recording on it, recorded the same night of the murders by the female victim, and it's pretty terrifying. I've already handed it to the police, but I made a transcript of the recording. What you're about to read is the unedited transcript of the cell phone recording found in the basement. I have to admit, it's extremely disturbing. The desperation in her voice will haunt me forever. If you're hearing this, please give it to the police. My husband is dead. It killed him. I'm so sorry, Scott. I can hear it now, upstairs, looking for a way in, and it's only a matter of time before it finds one. I've barricaded myself in the basement, and I've got my eyes on the only door. One way in, one way out. You see, it can't move if you're looking at it. It began 12 weeks ago, the night Scott, my childhood sweetheart and husband of 5 years, confessed that he'd had a drunken one-night stand on his bachelor party in Europe. The apparent guilt had consumed him for the past 5 years, and his sudden urge to be truthful was due to the fact we were due to get married the same year. His words hit me like a freight train, and the urge to vomit washed over me like a tsunami. I stormed out of the house, our house, that we'd bought together 12 years prior. I felt like the world had swallowed me whole, and in a way, it had. I was struck with a throbbing chest pain that rapidly spread down my entire right side. The pain intensified, taking my breath away, and I stumbled into a tree to steady myself as I felt my body about to faint. Then, darkness. The next thing I remember was waking up in a dark and dismal forest, devoid of any color. The air was dry and had a distinctive molderous smell, like rotten meat or that of a decaying carcass. But worst of all was a terrifying feeling that I never experienced before, and one that I pray I'll never feel again. The feeling of absolute hopelessness. The sky was dull and cloudless, and was ripped apart by soundless, ferocious lightning that illuminated the bleak landscape I found myself in. I felt like I'd been wandering for hours, maybe even days, when I came across a decaying cave. Animal bones crushed beneath my feet as I made my way towards it. As I approached the cave, the putrid smell grew with intensity, causing me to retch, and I was violently sick, bringing up my own stomach bile. The entrance was made of crumbling stone and was completely opaque. I threw a small stone into it and heard it ricocheting down the stone steps and off the walls. The silenced lightning strobed the area, and I was able to glimpse into the cave and see a few descending steps. Then 2 yellow, reptilian-like eyes flashed in the darkness. I stumbled backwards, and just as the lightning struck, I was forcefully thrown down by an unseen force. The lightning flashed continuously, accompanied by a gale-force wind, tossing me around like a rag doll. My eyes were fixed on the cave, and I crippled in terror as a pale, gangly hand reached out around the crumbling stone. Another flash hurled me hard against the tree, and suddenly I woke up in the back of an ambulance with paramedics hovering over me with a defibrillator, and 2 words that sent a cold and grotesque shiver down my spine. Welcome back. Welcome back? From where? What was that place? That thing in the cave? How long was I gone? Hundreds of questions raced through my mind, but none of which I had the answer for. Not yet anyway. You died in the back of that ambulance, the doctor said as I lay in the bed of the ICU. The room tilted as I tried to digest what the doctor was telling me. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I'm 30 years old, I eat healthy, and I run 4 times a week. How could this be happening to me? My scans revealed I'd inherited a faulty gene and developed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and suffered a cardiac arrest. I spent the next 7 weeks in the ICU and told nobody of the dark forest and the creature with the yellow eyes. Just the thought of that place was enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. My mother practically moved into the hospital, fussing over me like mothers do. She blamed herself for my condition, even though her scans were clear, meaning that I inherited the faulty gene from my absent father. My husband Scott came in on the first day, but I asked him for space. I needed some time to heal and process everything that happened, about both my condition and his infidelity. Although he kept a promise he would call my mom every day to check on me, to make sure I was okay. I wasn't. Not because of my condition, but for something else. I'd started to see something. I wasn't sure what it was at first. It started as a tiny dot in my peripheral, nothing more than a speck on my retina. Of course, I had my eyes checked, but all the results came back clear, as did the result for my visual cortex. Days later, what started as a dot in my peripheral began to grow. The first time I saw it, it was in my doctor's office. He had left me alone for a moment while he consulted with my surgeon. It was dark outside, and the sound of heavy rain pitter-patting against the glass was hypnotic. I stared out of the window, watching as a small handful of people came in and out of the hospital. Then my eyes were drawn to an ominous silhouette at the far end of the parking lot. I couldn't make out any distinguishing features due to the minimal light, but there was something there, standing deadly still in the shadows. A car horn broke my review. A man was getting into his truck in the lot and must have pressed the horn by accident. I turned back to the silhouette, and it was in a completely different position. It had moved. It was standing eerily still again, but like it had frozen mid-walk. I could just about make out its elongated limbs, like its arms and legs had been stretched out. The doctor returned momentarily, startling me. He'd gotten my scans, and everything was how it should be. "Good news, you should be okay to be discharged in a few days," he said. That was great news. I was ready to get out of the hospital. I turned back to the window in curiosity, but whatever I saw was gone. I didn't think about it again until the night before I was going home. It was late, and most of the patients were sleeping. My room is situated at the end of the hall, so I get a clear view from it through my observation window. I wasn't quite ready to go to sleep and was watching something on my iPad. Suddenly, there was a putrid odor wafting in from my open door. The same unmistakable smell that I experienced in that other place. 2 nurses walked past my room, neither showing any signs they too could smell it. I covered my nose and mouth to try and stop me from heaving. Then my eyes drifted to the observation window and the corridor. The silhouette, it was there again, at the far end of the hall, completely still, with its back pressed up against the wall. But I could see it. It was tall and skinny, and had either feelers or tentacles stretched up against the wall like an ink spill. Its daunting yellow eyes stared straight at me. I saw another nurse walk up the hall and straight past it, like it wasn't even there. Maybe it wasn't, Maybe visual hallucinations were a symptom of what I'd been through, or maybe it was a side effect of the many meds I was taking. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. It isn't real, I whispered to myself. I opened my eyes. It hadn't gone. It had moved closer. Halfway down the hall, it had dropped onto all fours like a large dog, staring straight at me. Its long tentacles spread across the floor and up the wall. I was absolutely petrified. I moved over to the window tentatively. The smell which resonated from this creature was overpowering. I watched it for a few moments until a nurse walked past the window, startling me. And like before, when I looked back, it wasn't there. It was as though I'd imagined it. I climbed back into bed, but I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, my mom came to pick me up. I left with a suitcase of medications and instructions on how and when to take them. I didn't tell my mom or anyone at the hospital about my hallucinations. I was worried if I did say something, the doctors wouldn't let me leave. I had decided to stay at my mom's until I was ready to talk with Scott. He brought a box over with some essentials, like my comfy clothes, pajamas, and my own toothbrush, as I'd been using a cheap store-bought one up to now. He was sorry, and it was clear he hadn't been sleeping. He said he'd wait for me until I was ready to talk. I missed both him and our home so much, but I wasn't just ready to talk about it yet. My mom suggested that I go into town, see the locals, get some fresh air into my lungs. She offered to drive me, and then we would meet back up at the car after an hour. Whilst in town, I noticed a poster for the yearly traveling fairground in a storefront window. I have fond memories growing up on this fair. It's where Scott and I shared our first kiss. We were halfway around the Ferris wheel when it started to rain. He covered us with his jacket, and then he kissed me. This was the moment I knew I'd fallen in love with him. I was flooded with happy emotions, and it felt right that I texted Scott. I'm ready to talk. I'll be at the place where we shared our first kiss at 8 tonight. He replied instantly. I'll be there. Thank you. After a quick smile to myself, I went for a walk through the local market. It was bustling with energy. Vendors selling local, fresh produce, handmade furnitures, bakeries, and plenty more. After browsing the stalls, I was hit with that smell, that horrific, nauseating smell, and I felt the hairs on my arms prickle up. I knew it was here, somewhere, observing me. My eyes narrowed as I scanned the area. I weaved in and out of the locals, looking for it. Paranoia struck me like lightning. I was bumping into people as I went. All eyes had now turned on me. I burst into tears, sprinted back to the lot and leaped into my mother's car. I was sitting in the passenger seat, crying my eyes out. I looked out of the window and saw my mother rushing back to the car, shouting my name. Someone must have told her about my freak out. I looked out the other side of the window. It was there, standing on top of a vehicle, several cars over. Get away from me, I screamed. My mother whipped open the door. What is it? What happened? She replied. She couldn't see it. Nobody could. I told her that I had a panic attack. I hadn't been around people outside of the hospital for a few months and I felt overwhelmed. She knew I wasn't being truthful, but it's the only answer I could give her. That night, I decided to go ahead and meet Scott at the fair. When I saw him waiting for me by the Ferris wheel, my heart felt whole again, if only for a moment. We got our tokens and went on the wheel. We talked as we went round about how sorry he was and how much of an idiot he'd been, which I agreed with. Everything was going well until I saw it again, standing on the top of the ghost house attraction, watching me. I kept my eyes on the figure whilst grabbing Scott's arm. Do you see it? I asked with a shaky voice. See what? He replied. It's standing right there, on the top of the ghost house. I could see him squinting to look, but I knew deep down that you wouldn't be able to see it because only I could. Sweetheart, there's nobody there. Look at me, he replied calmly. I can't, I said solemnly. If I look away, it will move. Chloe, look at me. There's nothing there, he said as he grabbed my chin and turned my face towards his. No, it will move. It wants me to look away, I screamed. I quickly spun around, my eyes darting back to the ghost house, but it wasn't there. I looked around, anxiously, Scott looking on with worry. Shit, where is it? My anxiety palpable. I looked down, and it was at the bottom of the Ferris wheel. It had moved inhumanely fast. I screamed and almost fell out of the carriage, but Scott held on to me. Hey, I got you. What is it? He said desperately, trying to keep hold of me. I stood up in a panic, rocking the carriage. Scott tried to hang on to me, but it was too late, and I plumped 20 feet to the ground. The last thing I remember was Scott screaming for an ambulance. I was fortunate enough to only suffer a sprained wrist and a slight concussion. My doctor wanted to keep me in overnight for observations, which I reluctantly agreed to. I decided to confide in Scott. I told him everything, from the cave in the forest to these creatures that's stalking me, this monstrous entity that must have crawled out of the pits of hell. And worst of all, it's getting closer to me. He could see that I was terrified, and instead of trying to explain away what I was experiencing, he just held me. And for the first in a long time, I felt safe. We spent hours just holding each other. He offered to stay the night, to stay awake in the chair whilst I got some sleep, but I couldn't have him doing that. After Scott left, I managed to get a few hours of rest. I woke up just after 2 AM and grabbed my bottle of water from the nightstand. That's when I noticed the door was closed, even though I specifically requested it to stay open. And then there was this horrendous smell. I knew it was close. It was in the fucking room. It was crouched down in the corner on all fours, blending into the darkness, watching me. I desperately tried to scream, but no sound would come out. Keeping my eyes on it, I slowly climbed out of bed with my back pressed firmly against the wall. I knew it couldn't move if I didn't look away. I sidestepped along the wall towards the door. I started to maneuver around the set of drawers, knocking something off that caught my eye for a millisecond. But that's all it took. It now was standing on its 2 legs. It must have been 8 feet tall, with outstretched limbs. A streak of moonlight illuminated part of its pale blue face. Its yellow eyes glistened in the light. Its slimy tentacles spread up the wall and onto the roof. I kept my back to the wall and kept moving. I made it to the door, grabbed the door handle, but it was fucking locked. I kicked the door, but nobody could hear me. I could see the key for the door on the table in my peripheral. I fumbled around the table without looking. I grabbed everything but the key. I knew I had to look to find the key. I quickly glanced to my left, saw the key, looked back, and the creature was point blank in front of me, reaching out for my throat. Its black, curved talon had pierced my neck and blood trickled down. Somehow I managed to scream, and within 2 seconds 2 orderlies had barged through the door. All they found was me, alone, with blood trickling down my neck. I barged straight past them and ran as fast as I could out of the hospital. I ended up running all the way home. I banged as loud as I could on the front door, forgetting that it was almost 3:30 in the morning. Scott entered the door in his pajamas with a worried look plastered across his face. I told him what happened at the hospital whilst he was bandaging my neck. See, this is proof what I'm seeing is real. It's physical proof, you believe me, alright? You have to, I barked. After a momentary pause, he replied, Yes, I believe you. I believe you're seeing something. I registered the pause and the hesitation in his voice. He didn't believe me, and I didn't blame him. After talking for a few hours, I had calmed down enough that I told Scott to get some sleep. He was reluctant to leave me, so he took a nap in the chair. I grabbed my laptop and searched the web for anything related to what was happening to me. There are thousands of incidents across the world relating to the haunted house, demons, cults and possessions, but none of that was specific to the entity that was stalking me. Every time I hear a sound, a car outside or a floorboard creak, I jumped. I was a nervous wreck. I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. I looked out of the window into the darkness, expecting to see it watching me, but it wasn't. I went back into the room and it was there. I dropped a glass of water and it shattered on the floor. Scott leaped from the chair. What's it? What is it? I couldn't speak. My lips were glued shut. I slowly raised my hand and pointed at it. It was standing at the far end of the room. I kept my eyes on it the entire time. Scott rushed over to me. Hey Chloe, there's nothing there, sweetheart. Whatever you're seeing, it isn't real. He headed towards it. No, Scott, please don't, I pleaded as I grabbed his arm. There's nothing there, I'm going to prove it to you. He cocked his arm back and swung his fist. Only his arm stopped mid-swing. He hit the fucking creature. I moved to grab Scott and stood barefoot on the broken shards of glass, cutting my feet. I screamed out, and for a split second, I looked down. And that's all it took. When I looked up, the creature had already grabbed Scott and folded him in half like a piece of paper. The sound of his spine breaking echoed through the room. Scott lay dead on the floor, his eyes wide open and looking at me. I screamed and backed away into the kitchen. I slammed the door shut and ran to the rear door. It was locked and I left my keys in my bag in the front room. I noticed Scott's cell phone on the countertop, so I grabbed it and ran down into the basement. I shut the door and pushed the spare fridge in front of it, and then I hid in the corner, crouched down beside a washing machine, which is where I am now, hiding, crying. I can't tell anyone because Scott's cell doesn't have a signal down here, which is why I'm recording this message on a cell in the hopes that someone will hear my story. I can hear it now, moving around upstairs. It knows my eyes will be watching the door, so it's looking for another way in. I'm so scared. I'm the reason Scott's dead, my true love, and I never forgive myself. The thought of that is far worse than anything that monster can do to me. Oh god, it is here. The old fucking laundry chute. God damn it. What the fuck are you? It's watching me with these horrifying yellow eyes. I can't keep running because it will find me and I won't put anyone else in danger. It's me that it wants. Scott, I'm sorry. I love you so much. And Mom, I love you so much. I'm going to close my eyes now. 3, 2, 1. That's it. That's the recording. It's very disturbing to me. If only you could hear her voice. She was terrified. The police haven't been in contact as I write this, and I'm not expecting them to either. The woman mentioned her mother in the recording. I might try and find her, tell her what I found, just in case the police won't believe it. Hey guys, thanks for listening to today's story. If you like this story, consider following me and leaving me a like in the comment. I also wanted to thank the author for letting me narrate this amazing story. Me and him would highly appreciate it if you go check him out on the links I will put in the description. And with nothing more to say, have a great night and until next time.